We now turn to our Zoom right now and welcome in the lead NFL draft analyst for Pro Football Focus, Trevor Sikkema, here on the Rich Eisen Show. How you doing, Trevor?
Rich, it's good to be with you here on this wild Thursday afternoon.
It is exactly that. It is exactly that. Okay, so we had our colleague from The Athletic, Dane Brugler, on yesterday. He called this the Caleb Williams draft. Would you agree with that, Trevor?
Yeah, I think that it has to be, right? I mean, he was expected to be the number one overall pick going into the season. He had, to Caleb Williams standards, a down year. And yet, wire to wire, he has just been the number one overall pick. No matter who has held the number one overall pick, he has always been the selection there. Even when at the beginning of the season, we thought, hey, maybe the Cardinals will pick back to back with number one and number two. We didn't know how great CJ Stroud was going to be at the time. And even with that being the case, we said, okay, well, Arizona's either drafting him or they're trading somebody to draft them at number one. So it's the Caleb Williams draft. He has been the identity of this thing the whole time, and it's not going to change when the draft kicks off on Thursday night.
All right, so then the decision at number two at your estimation, break that one down for me here for the Commanders. What do you think?
So it feels like we're leaning Jaden Daniels to be the pick at number two, which is understandable, right? You look at Jaden Daniels and his dual threat ability, everything that he could do as a runner. Talk about the spread offense that he operated in under LSU, how he was so great at taking care of the football last year, the stats that he put up this year, obviously a Heisman Trophy to show for it. And you get Cliff Kingsbury to be your offensive coordinator who knows all about spreading the ball all the way to the sideline. And so that makes a lot of sense. If I was making the pick, I'd be taking Drake May. He has been my QB2 for a while now, firmly, I will add. I think that Caleb Williams is QB1. I think Drake May is QB2. And then you have a little bit of a discussion, okay, who's QB3? Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy. I think you can get into some of the nuances there with the different styles that those guys have. But, man, it feels as though Drake May's getting nitpicked right now. That's how it feels to me, because when I look at this guy and the arm talent that he has, sure, it's not picture perfect every time. There are some throws that are some frustrating, that'll give you some frustrating accuracy, some frustrating ball placement. But to me, it's all stuff that I feel like it's correctable. And I just look at what this guy does from a arm talent perspective, especially when it comes to layering the ball, not just in the sideline, which we see a lot of college quarterbacks do, over the middle of the field, 10 to 20 yards down the middle of the field, that intermediate area between the numbers. That's where Drake May has so much experience. He had the most big-time throws in college football of any of these quarterbacks that we're talking about in that area, and it's so paramount to succeed there when you're an NFL quarterback. So for me, the debate at number two overall, again, if I was making the pick, I'd be taking Drake May, but it feels like the NFL and the Commanders themselves are leaning Jaden Daniels at this point.
Why do you feel that way?
It just feels like everything that we're hearing, man. It just feels like the total momentum is there for Jaden Daniels to be that guy who has kind of ascended throughout this entire process. We wondered, okay, is he a back end of the first round pick now? Okay, now is he a top 10 pick? Be QB3. And now we're having conversations about, hey, his pairing with Cliff Kingsbury might be something that the Commanders themselves, just don't want to pass on. And it feels like it's the opposite with Drake May. And look, it's talking season, right? The rumors are flying. We're hearing things that might be true, might be not. The shades of the Will Levis news and everything that was coming down to the NFL draft last year with him potentially going number two overall, and then he doesn't even get picked until the second round. I get all that, but feels like this has been a little bit slower building, a little bit more tangible. The Jaden Daniels stock has been rising and Drake Mays has been falling, as we have heard maybe what teams in the NFL believe about these quarterbacks.
Trevor Sikkema here from Pro Football Focus here on the Rich Eisen Show. So you're the Patriots at 3. What do you think they're talking about in their draft room right now? Because you've got to be going through the same conversations we just had about both of these quarterbacks, knowing you're going to be left with the choice of one, or if you're in love with J.J. McCarthy, going ahead and doing that, or finding out that the Giants love the one that you may not like, and you can then flip out to 6. I mean, what do you think is the conversation going on in the New England draft room right now?
I think it's all of those things, right? But I think no matter what, it has to be some sort of quarterback selection, right? I think the trade back is alluring. Like anytime that you're talking about moving down in the draft, somebody else is moving up from a quarterback, that's a pretty price. And we've seen that over the last couple of years. But I keep going back to what Gerard Mayo said right after his introductory press conference. I can't remember which news outlet he was on with, but he basically, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, said, we're going to pick a very important player, a very talented player at a very important position.
Yeah, he did.
And I'll let you guys connect the dots. Well,
No,
obviously,
I
this
heard
is a
that too,
team.
brother, because it was it was such a non-Belichick type answer. He said that we're going to take the best player at the most important position, is what he said.
Right.
And
exactly.
clearly,
and to me,
that's not long snapper. With all due respect to the long snappers, So
and to me, that makes me feel like for him to say that in the middle of January, I mean, we're 4 months from the draft at that point, 3 months to the draft at that point. You then have to be so comfortable with the top three quarterbacks in this draft that you'd take any of them. I don't think that he was trying to like totally get the media off of their trail, or that he was, trying to lie to anybody who said that. I think he's genuinely excited and is trying to invigorate the fan base with, hey, we get it. Quarterback was bad for us over the last couple of years. We're going to fix that. And you only do that if you are comfortable with any of those top three quarterbacks. At least that's how I interpreted it. Now you can throw in J.J. McCarthy to the mix as well, and you've got a handful of options. So I get it. Marvin Harrison Jr., you ask a lot of people, he might be player one overall on your big board because of how good that guy is. New England cannot get out of this first round without one of these top big four quarterbacks. They cannot do it. You just can't sell it to the franchise. You can't sell it to ownership. There's no way they can do it after last year and how it ended for them.
So let's just assume, despite the dangers of such, that the first three quarterbacks go off the board, leaving J.J. McCarthy sitting there at 4. Which team would you counsel breaking the bank to move up with Arizona and giving Monty Ossenfort, the general manager of the Cardinals, the Godfather offer there?
Yeah, when we saw the Cardinals put out a social media video a couple days ago, or maybe it was last week, it was basically a highlight film of Monty on the phones last year, moving from 3 to 12, 12 to 6, and coming away with the guy. And, they'll zoom out and Jonathan Gannon's just sitting back and he's like watching an absolute artist at work. And so, he's not afraid to work the phones. And I think they're going to be doing that again because, like you mentioned, I think it's most plausible to say that 3 quarterbacks are going to go to start this draft. So I think that McCarthy is probably going to be on the board at number 4. Arizona's not going to be taking him. I look at 2 teams in particular that have the opportunity to actually give Arizona a deal that they would take. The first one's the obvious one, and it's the Minnesota Vikings at 11. Now, if the Cardinals are comfortable moving all the way back from 4 to 11, they can probably get number 11 from Minnesota, the number 23 pick in the first round that they got from the Houston Texans, and a little bit more than that because you're paying the tax of that team moving all the way outside of the top 10 for a quarterback. So even if that's the case, Arizona could then say, hey, we'll get number 11. We could use that extra draft capital, maybe trade back up to still get one of those top receivers that they need. But then the other team to me is actually the Giants, which you brought up. I think that they're going to be pretty desperate to go up and get one of these quarterbacks. I think they're going to give a pretty competitive deal to move to either 4. Well, they're going to talk to the Patriots at 3, but I think they're going to give a pretty competitive deal for 3, 4, or 5 whenever a quarterback is still on the board, because I think they desperately want to upgrade. I really do believe that. They, of course, can offer one of those teams something that the Vikings cannot, and that is a pick in the top 6. And that is a heavy value for the Cardinals specifically, who would like to get out of this draft with a wide receiver 1. So if you don't move all the way back to 11, Malik Neighbors is still in play. Rome Odunze is still in play. And you're getting some extra draft capital from them. So to me, that's what I think about when I think the number 4 overall pick, one of these quarterbacks is still on the board. Who's going to move up for it? Those are the 2 teams that I think could have the most competitive offer.
Why not the Raiders here, Trevor? Let's talk about the Raiders a little bit. Trevor Sikkema, of the Pro Football Focus NFL Draft Board analyst right here on the Rich Eisen Show. So let's talk about the Raiders a little bit here, because right now, they have Aiden O'Connell, right? And they've got the great Gardner Minshew, who I adore, a 2-year deal. And they're sitting there at 13. And, the whole concept that Antonio Pierce knows of Jaden Daniels from the Arizona State days just keeps resonating in my head. And if the Patriots are sitting there at 3 and they wanted Drake May and they didn't want Jaden Daniels for whatever reason, right? The Raiders might godfather their way up. Or you would counsel sticking and see if Bo Nix or Michael Penix could be more their style. Where do you stand on that subject matter?
So I think that they're going to be aggressive, for as much as Aiden showed you some moments over the last year, and as much as Gardner Minshew has been a serviceable kind of spot starter in this league the last couple of years as well. They, of course, would like to get a young franchise quarterback that they can really believe in and say that they've got their future franchise caliber guy on the roster. I think they're going to explore trading up. I feel like those conversations have already happened with them, but it's hard for me to find a reality where they can beat Minnesota's offer if Minnesota is also interested in whatever quarterback would be available at, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5. And then I think the same with the Giants. So the Raiders are in an interesting case, kind of similarly to the Denver Broncos, right? Broncos just have Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci as their quarterbacks right now. They would love to go up and get one of these quarterbacks as well. But the Broncos have pick 12, don't have a second round pick. And the Raiders, they do have a second round pick, but they're picking even further down the draft at 13. For the Raiders to outbid the Vikings with 2 first round picks in this year's draft, which matters a lot because this draft is really talented. Sometimes you get draft classes where, GMs consensusly go, it's not really a great draft class. Let's get future picks, things like that. The 2 first round picks in this draft mean a lot because it's extremely talented. So you're going to have to outbid that team with 2 first round picks, or again, the Giants that already have pick number 6, and they're offering something that none of those guys can offer of a top selection. So I definitely hear you. I think the Raiders are going to be well within the conversation, and they're going to be trying to work the phones. I just don't know if a world exists where they can beat those prices, because for them, the starting price to move into that range for a quarterback probably going to be 3 first round picks, right? And are you comfortable doing that? I know a quarterback makes all the difference in the world, but man, that's a heavy price for who would be QB3, QB4 in this draft. If you love them, it doesn't matter. But man, whenever I try to think of the Raiders moving up, I just think of how much it would cost them, and it feels like that price might be a little too high.
All right, so you say the draft is a particularly deep one. We all know about the wide receiver position. Where else do you think that this will yield second, third, fourth round gems this year, Trevor?
Yeah, I think offensive tackle, offensive line in general, really deep class. Like, we've got a crazy over-under for total offensive linemen. I mean, we're near double digits for the first round. So I think offensive tackle, you'll have an opportunity to pick some of these guys, probably early part of the second round, that could eventually be really good starters for you. And that's not often the case, right? Offensive line and offensive tackle specifically is one of those positions that you either draft them very high or you don't have one, right? They never become available. They never hit free agency. When you got a good offensive tackle, they're normally sticking around and a team's not going to let them go. So the fact that we're living in a world where you could realistically look at some guys at the top of the second round and say to yourself, this guy could become a legitimate starter someday. I feel like that's a big luxury. I think the same with corner as well. We've got 5 corners that could all go in the first round, but even getting beyond some of those guys, you've got guys in round 2 and round 3 who very intriguing. If you're more of a zone coverage team, if you're more of a man coverage team, there are some scheme specific players who I think maybe that versatility overall pushes them down the board a little bit, but they could fit perfectly exactly what you want to do. So wide receiver you mentioned is very deep, but I also think that offensive tackle, offensive line in general, the center class, the interior offensive line class, I'll shout them out as well. You're going to get starters in round 3, maybe even round 4 in this class, and then the corners as well. It's just a really deep group at those premium positions.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty cool that we're getting set for this sort of thing in Detroit. So I'll ask you a question I've been asking everybody. Give me a guy or two that if you're in a draft room, you're like, we are not getting out of this draft without getting this guy. You're hell or high water. You're coming away with him. Give me 2 of them, please.
I'll speak to your Michigan heart here.
Okay.
Mike Sanders still has to be one of them, right? I mean, just one of the best football players in college football over the last couple of years. And I mean, converted wide receiver, so he's got really great ball skills. He ain't afraid to come up and play against bigger tight ends, against shiftier wide receivers. I don't worry about him near the line of scrimmage because I know he's fearless. Like, okay, maybe he won't erase the block or anything like that, but he's going to spill things back inside. He's going to set the edge as best as he possibly can. He is just so highly competitive, and that's somebody that, like, those are the characteristics, right? It's a draft where you always talk about, like, potential and what this guy could be and the ceiling and things like that. But sometimes it's just about drafting really good football players. And so I think Mike Sanders still has got to be the guy that I'm standing on the table for. And then I'll stick with defensive backs. Another guy that I feel like I'm just way higher on than a lot of other people is Cooper DeJean from Iowa. It's a really good cornerback class, but people talk about Quinyon and he's fantastic, and Terrion Arnold, it's the same thing. But man, if we go back to 2022's tape, Cooper DeJean was locked down, man. I get he hasn't played a ton of man coverage, but come on, the ball skills are there for him. You look at this guy back in his high school athletic days, he is an incredibly decorated all-around athlete. He brings that to the football field, the instincts, the ball skills, the shutdown ability, and he's one of the best tacklers in the draft. Those are two guys at the cornerback position, specifically, that I'm pounding the table for. That I say, if we have a chance to draft this player and this is a need for us and this fits, this is the guy that we want. He increases the talent level, the identity, the culture, the toughness, exactly what you'd want to be as a Super Bowl winning franchise.
All right, those are good answers. You went Big Ten championship game, one from Michigan, one from Iowa. But I can't let you go without giving me an offensive one. Give me an offensive one. Is it a receiver? Is it a running back? Give me somebody that you're like offensive player, third, fourth round, whatever. It doesn't have to be, or you're just not getting out of the draft without that guy.
So, okay, I'll give you two that I think are pretty unique.
All right, Trevor, I knew you could. Go for it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, one of them, I know he's a little bit smaller. I know he didn't test as well as we thought he was going to. Oregon running back Bucky Irving will make you miss in a phone booth, baby. I mean, this dude is awesome. We have two metrics at PFF that we love to lean on when it comes to separating running backs from the offensive line in front of them, right? Because it's a very difficult thing to do. You talk about stats and production and touchdowns and rushing yards, and you go, yeah, okay, well, it was just the offensive line in front of them. Two metrics that we have that I like that helps us do that. It's not, the gospel, but forced missed tackles per attempt, which means, okay, how often are you making somebody miss in space? That's individual talent. And then yards after contact per attempt, okay? That's all right. The offensive line maybe didn't do as good of a job as they could have. You're taking on contact, whether it's at the line of scrimmage, whether it's 2 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards down the field, but you are still getting more yards after that. Bucky Irving, incredibly high percentage in both of those categories. So he's somebody who he'll get drafted a little bit later because of the measurables, because of the lack of great athletic testing. But I love those two things about him. I think he's fantastic. And then the other one, look, Johnny Wilson, the wide receiver from Florida State, they don't move like him, man. They don't. 6'6", 231 pounds. But people talk about, he's got to be a converted tight end. If you're saying he's got to be a converted tight end, I don't think you're watching the right games. I really don't, because he'll show you the quick footwork off of the releases. He'll give you the wiggle in the route. He'll set guys up with some shoulder shimmies. He'll chop his feet, and he'll break and create separation for a 6'6", 230-pound wide receiver. Now, got to catch the ball with more regularity. I wish he was a little bit stronger at the catch point, but when it all comes together for him, those splash plays, that's just, it's rare. He's got rare movement skills for a player of his size. I can't quit a guy like that. Third, fourth round, absolutely give me this dude and his unique athletic ability.
Good stuff, Trevor. Thanks for the call. Thanks for the Zoom. Greatly appreciate it. Just leaving you better than I found you. You work for Collinsworth. Looks like that chair you're sitting on has wheels. You should slide in to every Zoom that you start. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know if I could steal it, but maybe I'll slide out. Maybe I'll just do one of these.
There
Thanks,
you go.
Rich.
Hey, Trevor Sikkema with a walk-off right there.
Boy.
Very good. As you can see, Trevor doesn't have kids because the outlet didn't have the little plastic things. Yep. They're child-proofed. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.